A single dad stood between armed criminals and two innocent girls, his arms spread wide as a human shield. 3 bullets tore through his body, but he refused to fall. His last words before darkness took him, "Don't touch her." Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the old apartment building on 5th Street. Inside apartment 3B, a man sat at a worn wooden table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. His name was David Chen, and his hands trembled as he counted the few dollars he had left. "Papa, I'm hungry." The small voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. David looked up to see his daughter Emma standing in the doorway, her 7-year-old frame thin beneath an oversized sweater. Her brown eyes were wide and trusting, and in that moment, David felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. "Come here, sweetheart," he said softly, opening his arms. Emma ran to him, and he pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. It was the cheap kind from the dollar store, but to him, it smelled like heaven. "I'll make us something special tonight," he promised, though he knew the refrigerator held only a few eggs and some bread. "How about French toast?" Emma's face lit up. "With sugar on top." "With sugar on top," David confirmed, forcing a smile. As Emma skipped back to her room to play with her worn stuffed bear, David closed his eyes and fought back tears. It had been 3 years since Sarah died. 3 years since the car accident took his wife and left him alone to raise their daughter. 3 years of struggling, working 2 jobs, and still falling behind on rent. The cancer had come first, eating away at Sarah's body and their savings. Then, just when they thought she might recover, the accident happened. A drunk driver. One moment of someone else's carelessness, and David's world shattered. He looked at the eviction notice on the table. 2 weeks. That's all the time he had left before they would be on the streets. David stood up and walked to the small kitchen. As he cracked eggs into a bowl, he made a silent promise to his daughter. He would fix this. Somehow, he would give her the life she deserved. The next morning, David dropped Emma off at school, watching as she ran through the gates with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She turned and waved, her smile bright despite everything. He waved back, his heart aching with love and worry. David worked as a janitor at the city courthouse during the day and drove a delivery truck at night. His body was exhausted, running on coffee and determination. But he never complained. Every dollar he earned went toward keeping a roof over Emma's head and food in her stomach. That afternoon, as David was cleaning the courthouse floors, he overheard a conversation that made him stop. "The crime commissioner's daughter is in danger," a police officer was saying to his colleague. "There's been a credible threat against her life. Some gang member she helped put away just got released, and he's sworn revenge." "What's the commissioner doing about it?" the other officer asked. "She's keeping her daughter close. Won't let her out of her sight. But these people are serious. They'll strike when the opportunity comes." David continued mopping, but his mind was racing. Crime Commissioner Rebecca Walsh was a legend in the city. She had cleaned up the streets, taken down corrupt officials, and put away dozens of dangerous criminals. She was tough, fearless, and uncompromising. But now someone was threatening her daughter. David didn't think much more about it until later that evening. He was picking up Emma from her after-school program when he saw a little girl sitting alone on the steps outside the community center. She was about 9 years old, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail, and she was crying quietly. "Are you okay?" David asked gently, kneeling down beside her. The girl looked up, her green eyes red and puffy. "My mom was supposed to pick me up an hour ago. She's always late because of work." Emma tugged on David's sleeve. "Papa, can we help her?" David looked around. The street was growing dark, and this wasn't the safest neighborhood. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie," the girl whispered. "Sophie, do you have a phone number I can call?" Sophie nodded and recited her mother's number. David dialed it on his old flip phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried twice more with the same result. "Tell you what," David said. "Why don't you come get some ice cream with us while we wait for your mom to call back?" Sophie's face brightened a little, and she nodded. The three of them walked to the small ice cream shop on the corner. David bought them each a cone with the last few dollars in his pocket. They sat at a wobbly table, and Emma started chattering away to Sophie about her stuffed bear and her favorite cartoons. David watched the two girls laugh together, and for a moment, his worries seemed distant. Then Sophie's face suddenly went pale. "That man," she whispered, pointing toward the window. "He's been following me." David turned to look. A man in a black jacket stood across the street, smoking a cigarette and staring directly at them. When he saw David looking, he didn't look away. Instead, he smiled, a cold, threatening smile that made David's blood run cold. "Sophie," David said carefully, "is your mom someone important?" Sophie nodded slowly. "She's the crime commissioner. But please don't call the police. She gets so worried when I tell her about stuff like this. She already has so much stress." David's mind raced. This was Commissioner Walsh's daughter. The same girl who was being threatened. And that man outside was definitely not here by accident. "Girls," David said calmly, "we're going to play a game. We're going to leave through the back door and walk very quickly to my car. Can you both do that for me?" Emma looked scared but nodded. Sophie gripped the table. "On the count of 3, David said. 1, 2, 3. They stood up and hurried toward the back of the shop. David held both girls' hands tightly. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. They pushed through the back door into an alley. David's delivery truck was parked 2 blocks away. They started running. Behind them, David heard footsteps. Heavy and fast. "Keep running," David urged the girls. "Don't look back." They reached the truck, and David fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. He threw open the door and helped both girls inside, then jumped into the driver's seat. The man in the black jacket stepped in front of the truck, blocking their way. He wasn't alone anymore. 2 other men flanked him, both carrying something under their jackets. David's mind went blank with fear. But then he looked at Emma's terrified face, and something inside him changed. A fierce, protective instinct took over. He revved the engine and honked the horn. "Move," he shouted. The man didn't move. Instead, he pulled out a gun. David made a split-second decision. He slammed the truck into reverse, tires squealing, and backed down the alley at full speed. The men started running after them. "Hold on, girls!" David shouted. He spun the wheel, turning the truck around, and then gunned it forward down a side street. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Behind them, a car roared to life and gave chase. David's mind raced. He couldn't go home, they'd follow him there. He couldn't go to the police station, it was too far, and they'd never make it. He needed help now. "Sophie," he said urgently, "what's your mom's direct number?" "Not her cell phone. Her office number." Sophie gave him the number with a shaking voice. David dialed it one-handed while driving through the city streets, running red lights and weaving through traffic. A voice answered. "Commissioner Walsh's office." "This is an emergency," David said breathlessly. "I have the commissioner's daughter with me. We're being chased by armed men. We need help right now." There was a pause. "Who is this?" "My name is David Chen. I'm just a citizen who happened to be with your daughter when these men showed up. Please, you have to send help. We're heading toward the old warehouse district on 8th Avenue. Stay on the line," the voice commanded. "We're sending units now." David could hear the car behind them getting closer. He took a sharp turn, and the truck tilted dangerously. Emma screamed. "It's okay, baby," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Papa's got you." But his heart was hammering in his chest. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw the pursuing car getting closer. One of the men leaned out the window, and David saw the glint of metal. "Get down," he shouted at the girls. "Both of you, get down on the floor." Emma and Sophie ducked down just as the rear window exploded. Glass sprayed everywhere. David felt a sharp pain in his shoulder but kept driving. They were in the warehouse district now, surrounded by abandoned buildings and empty streets. David's vision was starting to blur. He realized he'd been shot. "Papa!" Emma cried out, seeing the blood on his shirt. "I'm okay," David lied. "Stay down." He could hear sirens in the distance, but they sounded far away. Too far. The pursuing car rammed into them from behind, and the truck lurched forward. David fought to control it, but his injured shoulder made steering difficult. He made a decision. He couldn't outrun them, not in this condition. But he could give the girls a chance. David slammed on the brakes and pulled the truck behind a large dumpster, partially hiding it. "Listen to me very carefully," he told the girls. "Both of you are going to stay in this truck. Lock the doors after I get out. No matter what happens, don't open these doors until the police arrive. Do you understand?" "Papa, no." Emma sobbed. "Don't leave me." David's heart shattered, but he forced himself to be strong. "I love you more than anything in the world, Emma. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And Sophie, your mama loves you the same way. I'm going to make sure you both stay safe." He kissed Emma's forehead, leaving a smear of blood. Then he looked at Sophie. "Take care of my daughter." Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. David got out of the truck and locked the doors. The pursuing car screeched to a halt 20 feet away. 3 men got out, guns drawn. David stood between them and the truck, his arms spread wide. Blood dripped from his shoulder, but he didn't move. "Where's the girl?" the leader demanded. He was the man in the black jacket from earlier. "Gone," David said. "I put her in a taxi 3 blocks back. You're wasting your time here." The man laughed. "You're a terrible liar. She's in that truck, isn't she?" He started walking toward the truck. David stepped into his path. "Move," the man growled. "No," David said quietly. The man raised his gun and pointed it at David's head. "I said move." David's whole body was shaking, but he didn't step aside. He thought about Emma, about all the mornings he'd braided her hair before school, about the way she laughed when he pushed her on the swings at the park, about the drawings she made for him that he kept in his wallet. He thought about the life he'd promised Sarah he would give their daughter. A life of safety and love. "Don't touch her," David said, his voice stronger now. "You want to get to that little girl, you'll have to go through me." The man's face twisted with rage. "Fine." The gunshot echoed through the empty street. Pain exploded in David's chest. He staggered but didn't fall. Behind him, he heard Emma screaming his name through the truck windows. The man fired again. Another bloom of pain, this time in his side. David fell to his knees, but he used his body to block the path to the truck. His vision was darkening at the edges, but he could still hear Emma crying. "Papa. Papa, please." The man walked closer, standing over David. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the dumbest. Either way, you're dead." He raised the gun one more time, pointing it directly at David's head. David looked up at him and smiled, blood on his teeth. "Then I die protecting them. That's more than you'll ever understand." The man pulled the trigger. The third bullet hit David in the chest, and he collapsed onto the concrete. His last conscious thought was a prayer that Emma would remember him as someone who loved her more than life itself. The world went black. David woke up to the sound of machines beeping. His entire body felt like it was on fire. He tried to move, but pain shot through him, and he gasped. "Don't try to move," a gentle voice said. He forced his eyes open. A nurse stood beside his bed, checking the 4 in his arm. The room was blindingly white, and it smelled like antiseptic. Where am I?" David managed to croak. "County General Hospital," the nurse said. "You've been in surgery for 8 hours. You're very lucky to be alive, Mr. Chen." "Emma," David said urgently, trying to sit up despite the agony. "My daughter. Where is she?" "She's safe," the nurse assured him. "She's right outside with her grandmother. Would you like me to bring her in?" David nodded, tears streaming down his face. A moment later, the door opened, and Emma rushed in, followed by Sarah's mother, who David hadn't seen in months. Emma's face was puffy from crying, but when she saw David awake, she let out a sob of relief. "Papa." "Careful, sweetheart," the nurse warned, but Emma was already at the bedside, grabbing David's hand. "I thought you were dead," Emma whispered. "I thought I lost you like I lost Mama." David squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." His mother-in-law, Margaret, stood at the foot of the bed, wiping her eyes. "David, what you did, I don't have words. You saved that girl's life. Is Sophie okay?" David asked. "She's fine," Margaret said. "The police arrived just seconds after you were shot. They arrested all 3 men. Sophie's with her mother now." The door opened again, and a woman in a sharp suit entered. She was in her 40s, with determined eyes and an air of authority that filled the room. David recognized her from the news, Crime Commissioner Rebecca Walsh. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I came as soon as I could." David tried to sit up straighter, but the pain was too much. Commissioner Walsh held up a hand. "Please, don't strain yourself. I just wanted to thank you personally. You saved my daughter's life. You put yourself between her and those monsters without hesitation. You took 3 bullets meant for her." She paused, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. "Sophie told me everything. How you bought them ice cream, how you noticed the men following her, how you drove through the city to protect them, how you stood in front of the truck and refused to move." Tears were streaming down the commissioner's face now. "She said you told them they'd have to go through you to get to her. And they did. You took 3 bullets, and you still didn't move." David's voice was barely a whisper. "I have a daughter too. I couldn't let anything happen to yours." Commissioner Walsh wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Chen, I've spent my entire career fighting for justice in this city. I've seen the worst humanity has to offer. But I've also seen the best. And what you did yesterday was the most heroic thing I've ever witnessed." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out some papers. "I've taken the liberty of looking into your situation. I know about the eviction notice. I know about your late wife's medical bills. I know you work 2 jobs and still struggle to make ends meet." David felt a flush of embarrassment. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Commissioner Walsh said firmly. "This is gratitude. The city owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid. But we can start." She placed the papers on the bedside table. "The mayor has approved a financial assistance package for you. Your rent will be paid for the next 5 years. Your wife's medical debts have been forgiven. And we're setting up a trust fund for Emma's education." David stared at her in shock. I can't accept." "You can, and you will," Commissioner Walsh interrupted. "You gave everything to protect my daughter. You nearly died. The least we can do is ensure your daughter has the life she deserves." Emma was crying again, but this time they were tears of joy. She hugged her grandmother, who was also weeping. There's more, Commissioner Walsh continued. The City Council has voted to award you the Medal of Valor, the highest civilian honor we can bestow. The ceremony will be held once you've recovered. David couldn't speak. His throat was too tight with emotion. Commissioner Walsh leaned closer. Mr. Chen, you asked me earlier if my daughter was okay. She's more than okay. She's alive because of you. Sophie wants to see you, if you're feeling up to it. David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. A moment later, Sophie entered the room, holding her mother's hand. When she saw David, she ran to him, careful not to bump his injuries. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving me. David smiled at her. You're very brave, Sophie. You took care of Emma for me when I couldn't. Thank you for that. Sophie pulled something from her pocket, a drawing. It showed a man standing in front of a truck with his arms spread wide. Above him, she'd written in crayon, "My hero." I made this for you, Sophie said shyly. So you'll always remember that you're a hero. David took the drawing with trembling hands. He looked at this little girl he'd risked everything to protect, and then at his own daughter standing beside her, and he understood something profound. This was what it meant to be a father. Not just to your own child, but to protect all children. To stand between them and danger, no matter the cost. I'll treasure this forever, David told Sophie. The weeks that followed were difficult. David's recovery was slow and painful. He had physical therapy 3 times a week to regain strength in his shoulder. The psychological trauma was harder to treat. He had nightmares about the shooting, waking up in cold sweats, reaching for Emma to make sure she was safe. But he wasn't alone. Commissioner Walsh visited several times, bringing Sophie with her. The 2 girls had become inseparable friends. Margaret moved into David's apartment to help care for him and Emma during his recovery. The city's response overwhelmed David. Letters poured in from people he'd never met, thanking him for his courage. Local businesses donated supplies and food. A furniture store replaced all of his worn furniture with new pieces. A clothing shop provided new clothes for Emma. The Medal of Valor ceremony was held 2 months after the shooting. David stood on a stage in City Hall, still moving carefully because of his injuries, while the mayor placed the medal around his neck. David Chen represents the very best of our city, the mayor said to the assembled crowd. In a moment of crisis, he didn't think about himself. He thought only of protecting 2 innocent children. He stood against armed criminals with nothing but his own body as a shield. He took 3 bullets and refused to fall. His actions that day exemplify the courage and selflessness we should all aspire to. The crowd erupted in applause. David saw Emma in the front row, sitting next to Sophie and Commissioner Walsh. His daughter's face was glowing with pride, and seeing that made every painful moment worth it. After the ceremony, dozens of people wanted to shake David's hand and take photos with him. He felt uncomfortable with all the attention, but he graciously accepted their congratulations. Then a young reporter approached him. Mr. Chen, can I ask you a question for the newspaper? David nodded. When you were standing in front of that truck, with 3 guns pointed at you, what were you thinking? David was quiet for a moment, remembering. I was thinking about my daughter, he said finally. About all the times I'd tucked her into bed and promised her she was safe. About how I'd promised my wife before she died that I would protect our little girl. And I was thinking about Sophie, about how she was just a child who deserved to grow up, to have birthday parties and graduations and all the moments life has to offer. He paused, his voice growing stronger. I was thinking that if I moved, those men would hurt them. And I couldn't let that happen. I would rather die than let them touch either of those girls. The reporter wiped her eyes. You're an inspiration, Mr. Chen. David shook his head. I'm just a father. Any parent would have done the same. But deep down, David knew that wasn't quite true. Not everyone would have stood their ground. Not everyone would have been willing to die for someone else's child. 6 months after the shooting, David's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The financial assistance from the city meant he could quit his night job and spend more time with Emma. They moved into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. But the most surprising change came from Commissioner Walsh. "David," she said one afternoon when she and Sophie came to visit, "I have a proposition for you." They were sitting in David's new living room while Emma and Sophie played in Emma's room, their laughter echoing through the apartment. "I'm creating a new community outreach program," Commissioner Walsh explained. "It's designed to help at-risk youth and families in crisis. I need someone to lead it, someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone with genuine compassion and courage." She looked directly at David. "I want you to consider taking the position. The pay is good, and the hours are reasonable. You'd be making a real difference in people's lives." David was stunned. "Commissioner, I'm just a janitor. I don't have any experience with." "You have the most important experience," she interrupted. "You know what it means to sacrifice for others. You know what it's like to be desperate and struggling. And you've proven you'll do whatever it takes to protect the vulnerable." David thought about it. He thought about all the families like his, drowning in debt and worry. He thought about single parents working multiple jobs and still falling short. He thought about children who needed someone to believe in them. "I'll do it," he said. Commissioner Walsh smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." 1 year after the shooting, David stood in the community center that housed his new outreach program. The walls were painted bright colors, and the rooms were filled with resources for struggling families, food pantries, job training programs, counseling services, and after-school activities for children. Emma was in the children's area, helping younger kids with their homework. She had grown so much in the past year, becoming more confident and compassionate. The trauma of that terrible day had left its mark, but therapy had helped, and her relationship with Sophie had given her a support system beyond just David and Margaret. Sophie visited often, and she and Emma were like sisters now. Commissioner Walsh joked that she'd gained a second daughter. David walked through the center, checking on the various programs. A single mother thanked him for helping her find a job. An elderly man shook his hand gratefully after receiving assistance with his rent. A teenager told him the mentorship program had kept him from joining a gang. Each interaction reminded David why he'd accepted this position. He was making a difference. He was helping people the way he'd once needed help. That evening, after the center closed, David sat in his office and looked at the drawing Sophie had made for him. It hung on the wall in a simple frame, a reminder of that day, of the choice he'd made, of the 3 bullets he'd taken. He touched his chest, where the scars remained hidden beneath his shirt. They ached sometimes, especially when the weather changed. But they were also a reminder that he'd survived. That he'd been given a second chance. David thought about Sarah. He wished she could see Emma now, see how strong and kind their daughter had become. He wished she could see how their lives had changed. But somehow, he felt like she knew. Like she was watching over them. "I kept my promise," he whispered to her memory. "I protected our girl. And I'll keep protecting her, every single day." A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Emma peeked in, Sophie right behind her. "Papa, can Sophie stay for dinner?" Emma asked. "Of course," David said, smiling. As the 3 of them walked home together through the safe, tree-lined streets of their new neighborhood, David felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The struggles weren't over, life was never that simple, but they were manageable now. That night, David made his famous French toast for all 3 of them, with extra sugar on top. They ate together, laughing and talking about their day. Margaret joined them, and the small apartment felt full of love and warmth. After dinner, David tucked Emma into bed, just like he did every night. "Papa," Emma said as he pulled the blankets up to her chin, "Sophie told me that you saved her life that day. She said you were willing to die for her." David stroked her hair gently. "I would do anything to protect you and your friends, sweetheart." That's what love means. But what if you had died? Emma's voice was small and scared. What if I had lost you too? David's heart ached. This fear still haunted his daughter, and he understood why. She'd already lost her mother. The thought of losing him had terrified her. Emma, look at me, he said softly. She met his eyes. I'm here. I survived. And I'm going to be here for a very long time. I'm going to see you graduate from school, go to college, get married someday if you want to. I'm going to be the embarrassing dad who cries at your wedding and brags about you to everyone. Emma giggled through her tears. Promise? I promise, David said, kissing her forehead. I'm not going anywhere. As Emma drifted off to sleep, David sat beside her bed for a while, watching her breathe peacefully. He thought about that terrible day a year ago, about the fear and pain and desperation. But he also thought about what had come after. The connections he'd made. The lives he'd touched. The difference he was making in his community. Taking those 3 bullets had nearly killed him. But in a way, it had also given him a new life. A purpose beyond just survival. A chance to turn his own suffering into something meaningful. David stood up and walked to the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance. Somewhere out there, families were struggling just like he once had. Children were going to bed hungry. Parents were lying awake, terrified of eviction notices and medical bills. But now David was in a position to help them. To be for others what Commissioner Walsh had been for him, a lifeline, a source of hope. He touched the scars on his chest again, feeling them through his shirt. They would always be there, a permanent reminder of that day. But they weren't marks of trauma anymore. They were badges of honor. Proof that he had stood his ground. That he had protected the innocent. That he had been willing to sacrifice everything for children who needed him. Don't touch her, he whispered, remembering his words from that day. Those 3 words had defined who he was. Not just a father to Emma, but a protector of all children. A man who would stand between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. And that was a legacy worth living for. David turned from the window and walked back to Emma's room. She was sleeping soundly now, her stuffed bear clutched in her arms. He adjusted her blankets one more time, then whispered, I love you, baby girl. In the other room, he could hear Margaret washing dishes and humming softly to herself. The sounds of home. The sounds of family. David smiled. Tomorrow, he would return to the community center. He would help more families find their footing. He would continue the work that had become his calling. But tonight, he was just a father, standing in his daughter's doorway, grateful beyond measure that he was still here to tuck her in. The bullets had taken a lot from him, his health, his peace of mind, pieces of his body. But they hadn't taken what mattered most. They hadn't taken his daughter. They hadn't taken his capacity to love. They hadn't taken his determination to make the world safer for children like Emma and Sophie. In the end, that's what heroism really was. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Not superhuman strength, but human compassion pushed to its limits. Not seeking glory, but simply doing what needed to be done because someone had to do it. David Chen was a hero, though he would never fully accept that title. He was just a single father who loved his daughter more than life itself. A man who, when faced with an impossible choice, chose love over fear, sacrifice over safety, courage over cowardice. And in that choice, he had not only saved 2 little girls, he had saved himself. He had found purpose in his pain, meaning in his sacrifice, and hope in his healing. As David finally headed to his own room that night, he passed the mirror in the hallway and caught sight of his reflection. He looked different than he had a year ago. Older, certainly. More tired. But also stronger somehow. More certain. He was a survivor. A protector. A father who had proven that love was the strongest force in the world. And tomorrow, he would wake up and do it all over again. Not with guns and bullets, but with compassion and service. He would continue to stand between the vulnerable and harm, one family at a time, one child at a time. Because that's what fathers do. That's what heroes do. They show up, day after day, putting others before themselves, building a better world one small act of courage at a time. David turned off the lights and climbed into bed. His body still ached from the old injuries, but his heart was full. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, fell asleep without nightmares. He dreamed instead of Emma's future. Of graduations and birthdays and all the beautiful moments still to come. Of Sophie and Emma, grown up and strong, making their own difference in the world. And somewhere in those dreams, he felt Sarah's presence. Not sad anymore, not worried. Just proud. I kept them safe, he told her in the dream. I kept our promise. He could almost feel her hand in his, could almost hear her voice, I know you did, my love. I always knew you would. When morning came, David woke to the sound of Emma's laughter and the smell of Margaret making breakfast. He got up, wincing slightly at the familiar ache in his chest, and joined his family in the kitchen. It was just another ordinary day. And that was exactly what he had fought for, the chance for ordinary days filled with love and laughter and hope. The chance to be a father. The chance to make a difference. The chance to live a life worthy of the sacrifice he'd made. And as he sat down to breakfast with his daughter and mother-in-law, as Emma told him excitedly about a school project and Margaret poured him coffee, David smiled and thought, this is what I protected. This right here. This moment of peace and love and family. It was worth every bullet. Every scar. Every painful step of recovery. Because in the end, love always wins. Courage always matters. And one person, standing firm in the face of evil, can change everything. Don't touch her, he had said. And he had meant it with every fiber of his being. Those 3 words had saved 2 lives that day. But they had also defined a philosophy, a way of living. Protect the innocent. Stand up to bullies. Be willing to sacrifice for others. It was a philosophy David would carry with him for the rest of his life. And it was a philosophy he would pass on to Emma, teaching her to be strong and compassionate, brave and kind. The shooting had been a tragedy. But what came after was a triumph, the triumph of the human spirit, the power of community, the resilience of love. David Chen had taken 3 bullets for a stranger's daughter. And in doing so, he had shown the world what true heroism looked like. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty. It was messy and painful and terrifying. But it was real. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.